have a number of attendees already signed in. Hopefully we'll have more that will join us as we go along. So welcome to the community. We are also recording this, so the meeting will be made available for replay, and as well it's being shown on YouTube, on the city's website video link, and on the city's cable station. So hopefully people will be able to join in one of those ways or replay the video. It's very informational, tonight's meeting, and we'll go ahead and start the presentation. So Michael, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen. So for tonight's a community workshop, the City of Redondo Beach is updating our residential design guidelines to make them objective residential design standards. And this is our first community workshop. It's going to be very informative. Out of this, we will also have a public outreach process where we will be submitting a survey for the public to fill out, as well as having an email address that people can submit their comments. We'll keep that open till the end of the month. So we're really making sure that we get a robust response of the comments and feedback from the community. So next slide. I wanted to welcome everybody from the community who is able to join, or hopefully you're able to at least replay. We'll just get this set up. I think that's fine, Michael. And we'll go through, this is just the agenda. We'll go through some virtual protocols, an update, why update our residential design guide is a little description of that. That'll be about 10 minutes. Defining what objective design standards are versus the residential design guidelines that we have now. And then we'll go through the various standards for the City of Redondo Beach that we have now, and also ask for feedback from the community or any questions that you might have along the way. Go ahead and enter that into the chat, and we'll make sure that we're addressing that through both that presentation and then the question and answer at the end. And again, as I mentioned, there will be an online survey that will come out. Tonight will be a little preview for those of you who are online, and then we'll make sure that it's, we'll get the email blast out tomorrow morning, and as well have the link to the survey on the city's website first thing tomorrow morning. So next slide. So the virtual protocols for meeting participants, only the staff and team panelists will be visible with cameras turned on. All attendees will be muted with their cameras turned off during the presentation and even after during the question and answer. Meeting participants will not be able to unmute themselves during the question and answer period. If you have any technical issues during the presentation and you are a meeting participant, you can reach out to Maria Herrera, who's on the meeting, and here's her email address, maria.herrera@redondo.org. For virtual commenting, meeting participants can submit their questions to the staff via the chat function. So instead of raising your hand, we'll ask that you go ahead and just enter that into the comments. The comments will come through to us. If it's something specific to what we're talking about at that moment, it's something that might not be clear, we'll make sure that we address it at that moment. Otherwise, we'll save some of those questions to the end or when we have a break in the presentation. Here's just a little diagram of how to enter the chat. So you can open up the chat function that's at the bottom of your page. Just click on chat, and then you're able to chat to all panelists. The purpose of the workshop tonight, we are looking to provide an overview of the Redondo Beach, the residential design guidelines that we have, also the objective residential design guideline or design standards effort that we are undertaking, making this an objective document rather than something that's a little more subjective and not as direct. We're going to introduce some design topics that the standards will address, and then we'll provide an opportunity for the community members to ask questions or provide input in that chat function at the end of the meeting. The City Council had, why are we updating the residential guidelines? We had at the City Council meeting back in 2019, they had a strategic plan item where they wanted to update the residential design guidelines. Our design guidelines were last adopted in 2003. They're a little outdated for maybe what the needs and the growth of the community have been as far as what the construction interests have been of the residential community. And we wanted to make sure that those are in line with that as well. The R1A, those tall and skinnies, that neighborhood or that zone had not been included in the residential design guidelines. And we realized as those sites continued to develop that the City Council wanted to make sure that those were being addressed as well. We did receive funding from Senate Bill 2 or SB 2. It's a planning grants program. It's really geared towards these types of plans or projects that will help to streamline housing. And when we say streamline housing, it's not that we're trying to create more housing, but really trying to make the process a little easier. Right now, our current residential design guidelines are very subjective. There's a lot more of the terminology such as recommend or just highly discourage, and those are not necessarily measurable. And so it really ends up being a back and forth between a developer or a property owner and the staff on determining how is this project going to meet the residential design guidelines. So we really wanted to make sure that our residential design guidelines are objective moving forward. So the City Council hired CityWorks Design back in June to update the city's residential design guidelines. And we wanted to have input from focus groups, the Planning Commission, and community workshops and an online survey so that we can really get the feedback from a variety of the community. So not only making sure that we hear from the residents on what their issues have been, whether it's in developing their own project or in having projects develop around them, but as well recognizing some of the concerns that the design community has run into as they try to implement or manage a project through the residential design guideline review. And then as well, the Planning Commission, they review some of those multifamily larger projects, and this gives them an opportunity to also provide feedback on some of the issues that they have discovered. Thank you. Yeah, I'll turn it over to you on this one, Lisa. Let me go ahead and now introduce Lisa Padilla. She's with CityWorks, and Michael Nahara, both with CityWorks Design. And as well, unfortunately, we have another team member, Liz Barrell, who is unable to join us this evening, but she's definitely right there in the mix of the discussion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa to go through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Brandy. And good evening, everyone. And thanks for attending tonight's workshop. Before I get into the specifics of the objective residential design standards, we wanted to provide some quick context for you. As many of you may know, California has a housing shortage, and increasingly at the state level, the response has been to pass legislation that reduces the ability of cities to apply discretionary processes for residential development. Redondo Beach has long relied on its set of guidelines and is now recognizing the need to update and develop more objective standards that can meet the state's requirements while supporting the city's design and compatibility goals given the changing context. Next. As you can see on the slide, the state laws have been introduced over the last 5 years. We've got dates on a lot of these here. And we expect more proposals in 2022. The grant referenced in the earlier slide is one way that the state has extended financial help to cities to support the work that needs to be done to change processes and introduce objective design standards. Next. The end game for the process that we're kicking off with all of you tonight is to replace the 2003 design guidelines with new objective standards that maintain the design intent and incorporate the R1A district that Brandy mentioned, which isn't currently covered in the guidelines. The standards will be adopted in a manner that clarifies what is required versus what is suggested or recommended. The input from the community, and particularly those of you with us tonight who regularly work with the city on residential projects, is critical in getting this right so that future permitting process can work smoothly and successfully. And I really think that's to everybody's benefit. Next. So over the coming months, this input process will involve drafting standards, comparing them with recent projects, because we really need to test whether they indeed result in the desired outcome, and refining them to get it right. So today is really just a first step, and the city really values your participation throughout the full arc of the project, as does our consulting team. So what is meant by objective standards? The state defines them as standards that involve no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and are uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion available and knowable by both the development applicant or proponent and the public official before submittal. So the goal is to be straightforward and clear. Next. Like the guidelines, the objective standards will aim to result in new homes and remodels that fit well into Redondo Beach to maintain the character that has defined your city, even as it has evolved over the years. Additionally, the standards will address the challenge staff has had to review projects in the R1A zone, sometimes referred to as the tall and skinnies, since they weren't included in the guidelines. This district will have its own appropriate standards now. Next. Many residential projects in Redondo Beach are processed administratively. In other words, they don't require review by the Planning Commission. The code includes certain basic development standards, but as you can see here, authorizes design guidelines by requiring projects to be consistent with their intent. In an administrative process, this puts the responsibility on staff to determine whether a project is consistent. When a project does require Planning Commission design review and approval, the determination authority rests with the Commission. In either case, the same guidelines are considered. The new standards will allow staff to replace the interpretation of intent with something more objective. We plan to propose these standards along with illustrations so that staff and applicants can sit across the counter, or these days on a Zoom screen, with a clear mutual understanding of the requirements. In almost all cases, both sides should be able to come to the same conclusion about whether the plans they're looking at comply with the city's requirements, because the standards are verifiable and measurable. A standard is distinguished from a guideline by the terminology that is used. So standards are identified by words like shall or must, where guidelines use terms like should or may. For example, it should be easy to show on a set of plans that the entire second floor is set back from the front building line by a minimum of 10 feet and includes at least 40 square feet of planted area. In contrast, if the planner needs to determine that the proposed home reflects the neighborhood character, it is possible that a planner's understanding may differ from that of the applicant or even that of another planner. This determination brings in subjectivity. Another type of guideline example in the second bullet is use of the word may. This language is suggestive. It is important to have certain features. The standards should really require them. So if they're suggested through guidelines, that may be fine. However, the applicant cannot be made to include them in that case. There are a number of ways we can incorporate requirements through standards. The simplest is using a true-false method. For example, do the plans include building entrances from the street? Yes or no? Counts and measurements are also straightforward. Do the plans show 40 square feet of landscaping? That can be calculated. Ratios and calculations can be demonstrated by including the calculations in the information section on the plan's cover page or a section provided in the application form. We are also exploring situations in which a scorecard or a point system might make sense, for example, in providing landscaping. Rather than being prescriptive by saying how many trees and shrubs to use, a point system allows flexibility as long as a minimum number of points are achieved. In this example, you can see that large trees have been assigned a large number of points, indicating that they are highly desired. But the applicant may choose to install a higher number of smaller trees. This approach has been successfully used in other jurisdictions, so it's something we might contemplate, especially if it seems straightforward and more readily used by applicants. Next. Performance measures may be a bit trickier, but are sometimes a good way to go. For example, achieving a Cal Green tier level is something that a qualified professional can do and demonstrate compliance with. Minimizing water usage is often expressed as a performance standard, and this can be objectively determined given sufficient definitions for guidance. In summary, the goal of this project is to create objective standards that use clear language and avoid technical terms to the extent possible, defining those terms when they're unavoidable. The standards should be intuitive to look up, grouped together so they are easily found. The best examples that we know of use tables, lists, and graphics that most people are able to navigate and find the applicable information. One helpful tool is the use of cross-referencing, which the advent of online codes has made even easier through the use of hyperlinks that can take the user back and forth around the code. So I hope this general overview of objective standards has been helpful. Maybe before I introduce design topics specific to Redondo Beach, I might just make sure there aren't any general questions, because I'm not sure as a presenter I'm seeing if anything needs to be flagged. So for Brandy or Maria, please speak up, or Sean, if there's anything I need to answer along the way.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any comments from the public. Again, if one person, there we go. Thank you. We have one comment. Love the scorecard idea. So thank you to the
It's Mary.
Yeah. So with that, we don't have any questions at this time. I'd say we continue on. Again, to those who may have joined a little bit later, we're going to accept questions and comments through the chat feature. The chat will come then to the hosts and panelists, and then we'll review those. If it's something critical to what we're talking about at the moment, we'll do a quick interruption just so that of the presentation, so we can make sure everybody's clear on what any terminology or concept might be. And then at the very end, we'll take anything that's more of a general question about the residential design guidelines or the objective residential design standards that we're going to be creating. And we'll do that during the question and answer. So with that, I'd say we can go ahead on to the next.
Thank you, Brandy. So I think we're going to turn to really Redondo Beach and what your unique standards will likely address. Next. So there will be a focus on the single-family zones, so the objective standards are more simplified and predictable for applicants. As noted earlier, addressing the R1A zone not currently included in the city design guidelines. There's definitely a unique character and scale to each neighborhood in the city. Each has evolved in a different manner, and some neighborhoods have one or two predominant architectural styles we've noticed, while others are a very eclectic blend that has evolved over time. So we'll need to take all of that into consideration. The elements that most contribute to a neighborhood or building's architectural character include the topics shown here. And I'm going to walk through each of these, and we have some graphic examples. We'd like to hear if any other topics should be included in the standards and what you think could be improved based on what you've seen implemented across the city. You can provide input through the online survey, which is now available, or by email, And details on both of those ways to give input are going to be coming up at the end of the presentation. So it'll be really clear how to provide your input in both of those methods. If you have any questions as I go through each topic, again, just enter them into the chat and we can try to answer them as we move along for clarity, or we can address them at the end of the presentation.
And just to be clear, we had one question about getting a copy of the presentation deck, and we will make this presentation slideshow available on the city's website. Again, we'll do that first thing tomorrow morning. So keep an eye out for that. And then we'll also have an email at the end. So if you that's another way of providing feedback in addition to the survey.
And that's, Brandy, that's a dedicated email just for comments on the residential design guidelines?
For this project, yes.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Brandy and Sean. So lot design and setbacks. This topic controls where you can place a building on your site relative to the street and the adjacent properties. Lot design and setbacks also include building heights on hillside, on slope lots, and we'll need to be looking at kind of how those are measured. I just wanted to turn my email away because I'm hearing it ping on my side. I hope you aren't too. Roof types. The overall height and roof types are really important interrelated topics and usually one of the biggest indicators of a building style. As shown through these sketches, roof types have a very different implication for how modest or large a residential structure can appear from the street. For example, along the top row, a flat roof on the upper left that maximizes the allowable height has more volume and or often the appearance of more volume and will appear bigger than a gable or hip roof. Those are the sketches at the center and the upper right. So I think it's something we're hoping to hear more about in terms of preferences and what should or shouldn't be allowed through the new standards. Next. We'd like to hear your thoughts on roof decks as well. These have become very popular given the pandemic and incentives to gather with our friends and family outdoors. These are especially popular in Redondo Beach, where ocean views are treasured if you have them from your site, and open space is very precious. For mezzanines and cantilevers, these topics really relate to what I like to think of as maximizing what you can build on a site. I mean, I think that's maybe how a lot of people interpret them. Mezzanines are a topic that could be better defined in the new standards, we believe. Currently, they're allowed per the building code to exist as a third story, though that wasn't actually the original intent of the design guidelines when they were adopted. This could be modified and addressed and maybe not even allowed through the new standards if the community desired that. So we'd like to hear from folks on this topic for sure. Similarly, cantilevered upper floors, typically seen over side yard driveways, are a unique feature of narrow lots like those found in parts of Redondo Beach. They can result in a little bit of odd configurations, so we're curious how residents feel about upper floors that are allowed to cantilever and extend to the full setback. So staying focused on mezzanines for the moment, these are a couple photo examples that illustrate some built examples of homes with mezzanines that kind of pop up at the center and front. Next to a one-story landmark residence, which is the example on top, or popping up along a property edge adjacent to a traditional one-story residence as shown on the lower photo. I mean, that's something we've seen in a number of locations and are just curious what comments or thoughts all of you have in that regard. And some of this is definitely in the survey that we're going to encourage everybody to take. Where mezzanines are allowed at either the front, side, or rear of a residence can really affect how the building appears from the street and also impact the scale or the size as experienced from the adjacent properties. So is there a preference for what should be allowed? That's what we're curious about. we could add a definition to the standards that requires that mezzanines be open to the floor below and not be allowed to exist as a third story if that was desirable. So if that were the city community's preference, these two-story examples represent what would likely be the result. And of course, that would be no matter the building style. These happen to be a couple traditional examples, a historic district example, and even a newer residence, but just a more traditional scale and form with the two-story. So these are just another set of topics that mostly kind of shape how residences relate to the street and neighboring houses. And I can quickly introduce each of these for clarity. So for stepbacks and transitions, you'll recognize the sketches at the top are from the existing guidelines and some examples that show how stepbacks can ease the transition from a single-story home to a two-story home by stepping back. So that's often a very important part of design standards. Garages and habitable basement spaces will need to be addressed for hillside lots. And there are examples of lower garages with sloped driveways in some neighborhoods already we've seen. A design question is whether the driveway, curb cuts, and presence of the garage door are compatible with the neighborhood they would be proposed in. So that's an important topic we want to kind of dive into and definitely address in the standards. For landscape and planting palette, we have a sense that there's a lot of interest in the community in native drought-tolerant species, which can be included in the new design standards. Next slide. Some key principles under those topics are related to conservation of water, permeability of surfaces, and water retention, which can all be encouraged and where appropriate required in the updated standards. There are also other codes and ordinances in the city that address some of these aspects, so we'd have to coordinate that. But a term called ocean-friendly gardens refers to the use of native plants and the capacity to capture and infiltrate and use runoff from storms before it enters waterways in the ocean. So some of those design strategies can include permeable paving and rain barrel storage systems. So we hope that's something folks are interested in given your waterfront location. For driveways, whether they are front-facing or sometimes called front-loading, with or without tandem parking, or side-facing garages from the street, that can really affect the neighborhood character and how houses and buildings are perceived from the street. So those are topics that should be and will be in the new standards. Next. And similarly, rear garage access where alleys exist will be addressed through the standards with the intention of preserving the neighborhood pattern and cohesiveness of the residential frontages along the sidewalk. So there are a number of streets we know in the city where rear alley access is really well established and often it makes a lot of sense to maintain it. So this side, accessory dwelling units, I guess the important thing to note is that there are no proposed changes to the ADU regulations, but the grant that the city received to actually produce these objective standards required that ADUs be included. So we need to have a slide on them. And obviously you'll start to see those in any draft standards.
Yeah, if I may on this one, Lisa, the accessory dwelling units is something that the state had recently updated their regulations on, and there are very few standards that a municipality can implement, but what we wanted to make sure we include in the residential design standards going forward is what does comply with the regulations so that when an applicant comes in, they can have something to turn to and get an idea of what is acceptable, what is not going to meet the the requirements for ADUs or accessory dwelling units.
Thank you, Brandy. So, Brandy, would you or Sean like to cover these, or would you like me to?
Yeah, I will. We have, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to have this survey that is open today now. So you can use the QR code. You can use the look at the link there, and then as well, the survey is. We are going to make sure that we put that information out there tomorrow morning on the city's website. It'll be a news item, so it'll be kind of a one of the very top things that you'll see when you open the city's webpage, which is redondo.org. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. And with that, we're also going to accept comments. If you want to write your comment, maybe you don't want to fill out the survey, or maybe you want to fill out the survey, but you want to get some additional ideas out to us, you can also submit those comments through this RDG update at redondo.org. And that is very, as Sean had mentioned, that email is designated to this project. So we'll make sure that we see that email as we're going through those. And I wanted to, before we open it up for the full Q&A, just wanted to address a few questions that have come in. One person had asked that had noted that the previous design standards haven't been followed for a while. What are you going to use for a starting point as to architectural style and size moving forward? Actually, when in 2019, when the City Council had expressed their interest in making sure the residential designs guidelines were being implemented, we ensured in our staff that we were going through that review. And there was a little bit of pushback. There was certainly, I think, some relaxed reviews in the past. So we already are, but I think that goes to that point of what we have now is very subjective. And so we want to make sure that it's objective. It's in line with what the vision of the community and that character. How can you implement that going forward in a very objective way? And there was another point that's tied to that was one person noted, as the opinions of architectural expression are subjective to one's point of view, how do you plan to guard against favoring one style or set of styles over others in developing the residential design guidelines? And that goes back to, we're going to have objective residential design standards and all of those different components that Lisa mentioned. The height, if there's a roof type that needs to have an additional setback because of the roof type that's selected, perhaps that could be something that's added. Having limitations on roof decks, having requirements for that greening of the property, for the sustainability elements that may go to. I think the very first comment we got was somebody loved the scorecard idea, and that might be an option for that greenscaping, that sustainability components. Another note was roof decks. What a great opportunity to reduce runoff. And again, going to that sustainability, maybe there's that's part of that scorecard. And let's see. Well, there was somebody who made a note that they couldn't read the charts on one of the slides. Again, we'll make the slide deck available to the community tomorrow morning on the city's website.
Brandy, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you, when it's appropriate, I wanted to add a little bit about the style comment or maybe just respond to it. And maybe it's food for thought. Is that okay? Yeah.
Hold on real quick. Let me just see for R1A zones, what standard setbacks do we follow? I think that this would be a great opportunity to step in, Lisa, with that comment.
I mean, I think the style question and comment is a good one. What's interesting is because the objective standards haven't really been done per se, this is a new requirement throughout the state. And we are continuing to look hard for where they've been adopted because they are a different, kind of a little bit different, right? In that they're so objective, is that we want to provide, I believe, and that's why we want to hear from everybody, the flexibility to pursue different styles as desired by the applicant or the applicant's client. We will be looking at neighborhoods if there are predominant styles, but I think ideally styles are executed well, but it will be our work as a team and consultant team to craft anything related to style to be purely objective. So in other words, there may be standards that speak to different styles that will have like a checklist so that style can be executed as well as possible, but everything is objective. So it's a very good comment to come up, and I think it's going to be central to how these standards will be different from the prior ones. So I hope that's helpful. Thanks, Brandy.
Very much.
Okay, I think
A general comment, Brandy. All the chats will be saved. So just so everybody knows, all these comments and questions, we'll be retaining those, and I'm sure we'll create some document that summarizes these and some responses to these that we'll also put up on the website as well. Sorry, Brandy.
Yeah, no, that's okay. We had another comment. We should also include a conversation regarding basements and underground garages. Living next door to that type of construction is very difficult and damaging. Let's see. Another question, if someone has plans in the process with the city that haven't started yet, but will in the next few months, will the new design standards affect those? No. So if somebody's already applied, there is going to be that time of adoption. So after they're adopted and they become effective, at that point, any application that's not vested would then have to comply with those. And we would make sure that as we're getting close to that adoption, we're making sure that applicants coming in are understanding, and even now, letting them know that there is a process that's happening, because some people have ideas and they may want to talk to a planner about it right now, but they don't end up submitting something for several months down the road, and then it might be new regulations. We've even seen that with building codes when those get updated. So, definitely that's a good question. And how long do you think this process will take? And when do you expect those design changes to be implemented? So we're looking at timeframe wise with our scope of work with the consultant is to get some draft standards prepared this spring. Where we're going to collect the input from the community throughout this month, again, through the survey that you have here, through the email comments, and then we will start working on making those revisions and making these objective design. And when I say revisions, it's really going to be an overhaul. These are going to be very, to change something from being very subjective to being objective and having those measurable results is going to take some effort. And we'll come back to the community, to the Planning Commission in probably in around May and have those for review so that the community can provide additional feedback on those. Make sure we heard you. We will be going through the process, as Lisa mentioned earlier, of making sure that that we've vetted those to make sure that what we're putting in those design standards is what would come out of it in a project. Let's see. Will we be referring to adopting examples of design standards from other cities during this process? No, we do have our residential design guidelines. Currently, we will be continuing to implement those in this time frame, and so we're looking to implement something that's very Redondo Beach specific, not just adopting something from another community that may not even apply. As Lisa mentioned, there are several different neighborhoods, and we want to make sure that we're getting feedback from those neighborhoods. What are some of the key components that perhaps the community wants to maintain in that area?
I think as well on that point, as Lisa had said in the outset, these state requirements for these objective standards. So there's not a lot out there. These are all starting to show up. So it's
right.
There is a little bit of reinvention of the old design guidelines into these new standards. So
that's an excellent point, Sean. And by the way, everyone, Sean is our planning manager. I'm the community development director. And Maria is our planning technician. So, just wanted to give you some idea of questions. The state regulations that Lisa mentioned at the beginning of the presentation required objective residential design standards. And if you had adopted subjective standards prior to this, you could continue with those. However, we wanted to make sure that since we were updating ours anyway, we have to come into compliance with making them objective. And we also don't want the subjective to be challenged and create more difficulties in streamlining process. Let's see. Will there be guidelines regarding the residential commercial interface areas? This is going to be more residential and what's being defined on the residential property. This isn't a commercial design guidelines. I do think that that's a good question. I know that we've encountered some of the concerns with that, the commercial and residential being when they're next adjacent to each other, but this is actually going to focus on the development of residential properties. Are the plans that have already been submitted to the city for approval subject to the new design guidelines? As I mentioned, it's all in the timing. So if you've submitted them, if they are a vested plan, that can continue on. If you're just kind of testing the waters on what you want to do, and you then wait, several months to submit, we may end up having these adopted by the time you submit your application. Can you please post the survey link into this chat? And we'll see, Maria, if that's a possibility to share that in the chat with everyone, that would be great. So we'll see if we can do that. Somebody asked, what kind of comments do we think we're going to get if no one has any idea what changes you have in mind? This isn't about what changes we have in mind. This is about getting the feedback from the community. So if you have, something you've encountered in your neighborhood that you feel that you want to see addressed, whether it's you want to see something larger, maybe not something as large, or there's, somebody made the comment about the concern about that garage basement on a sloped lot. If you have those concerns, that's what the kind of feedback we're going to get. And we've received some throughout the last 3 years in implementing, both in the concern about what their neighbors are doing and the concern about what they can or cannot do on their own property. So that's what this process is. And that's why we're leaving this open for public comment through January 31st so that we can hear the feedback. This isn't about us creating something that we want. It's more about and what we have in mind, but rather wanting to see what the community has. The person has asked, how many lot split applications have you received so far? Although that's not specific to this conversation, just so the public is aware. Senate Bill 9 was passed and became effective on January 1st that allows for single family residential lots to be split and for 2 dwelling units to be constructed per lot. That's a whole nother presentation. And actually, you could go back and watch the December 14th City Council meeting. There was a presentation on this. But so far, we do not have any applications for that lot split. That's that process. This says, since this meeting doesn't include our 2 lots, be affected by the decisions made for R1 lots. Actually, this does include. So this is single family and multifamily. I think, it may have shown up as some of the images were single family, but to the cantilever, the cantilever driveway, the purpose of that cantilever is for the driveway to access the additional dwelling units behind. So the 2 and 3 on a lot. So that is an issue. And we did provide on the city's website, there are the existing residential design guidelines. Maria, maybe if you want to post that, just so people can get an idea of what you can see, just how subjective they are. And you can also see what is being addressed in both the single family and multifamily. And Maria, thank you very much for posting that survey link. Let's see, we have additional.
Yes.
Family residential be included in this effort, 1 to 4 units, more than 20 units, more than 100 units. The particular zones are called out. I want to say they're all just the multifamily. So this isn't addressing the mixed use at this point. Are the standards universal for all Redondo Beach, or are there different standards for each of the 5 districts? It's not district specific, although the person also commented District 3 seems to have more of the tall and skinnies. So it's not specific to the district, but rather to that neighborhood. And I think maybe, is it the next slide, Michael, if you can, yeah. So as you can see here, here are some of the different neighborhoods. Actually, Barrel Heights and the avenues currently have design guidelines for them. So, what we'll do is get the feedback, and if there are some of these specific neighborhoods where there continues to be the same kind of feedback about what types of standards would kind of keep what the interest is of that area, that might be something we're looking at for expanding it beyond the Barrel Heights and the avenues. We have a comment, keep open space as it is and don't mandate side-loaded garages. I think that's a point of one of the current residential design guidelines is regarding front-facing garages versus, and just, it goes back to that highly discouraged. In some areas, such as the avenues, there are some portions of the avenues where it's actually restricted. So, that's just an example of a comment where somebody doesn't want to see the side-loaded garages being mandated. And you can see that in the existing residential design guidelines, just to have an idea of some of the things that are subjective versus objective. Will the residential design guidelines be specific by community, neighborhood, area? I think we addressed that. Again, looking at maybe some of those specific neighborhoods if we get that feedback from those areas. How long does it typically take for plans to go through plan check with the city? That depends. If an application is complete and or any comments that are made on an application are returned in a timely fashion, and that turnaround and they're all being addressed, that can go a lot quicker if they're meeting the building code. So it all depends on the specific project and the response times for the getting any corrections back. Again, back to that streamlining and to that question is if there's subjective, such as that front facing versus side facing versus rear access garage, if there's back and forth on that currently because it's subjective, that can take a lot longer in that review process versus if it's here's what the standard is, this is what you have to meet. If you're not going to be able to meet it, you have to go to this process, or here are the things that are exceptions. That makes it super clear and it's really easy to just move forward. And that's why we want to really focus on these becoming objective. Another person would like to see more generous driveway widths. Parking is at a premium in the lower avenues, and many driveways can only accommodate 1.5 cars. And then Maria posted again the current residential design guidelines. Is the lower house in Redondo Beach? If it's this image, yes, that is located in Redondo Beach. Is the city removing the eyes on the street guideline? Image of the side-facing garage, cars parked in the driveway block the views from the front door to the street. I would not feel as safe in my home if I could not see the street from my front door if a car is parked in my driveway. I think these are all really good points. Right now we have this eyes on the street guideline that if in an area where front-facing garages are allowed, but if it's preferential, we're also requiring some kind of eyes on the street. And here, they would be meeting the guidelines with a side-loaded garage. And so that this would totally meet that, yet the eyes on the street might be a little blocked. So I think that those are all really great points. Redondo used to require 3-car garages if the home was over a certain square footage. That was when you had to have a large lot to have an enormous house. Yeah, right now, I don't see us, this is not about changing the amount of parking required for residential at this time. And I'm not sure if that person wants more 3-car garages or likes it the way it is. Be any height restrictions to roof decks? Currently, the top like where that railing is would have to, actually the top of the access point would have to be in that 30 feet.
Right.
So yeah, there is a height restriction currently. So that's one of the questions in the survey is regarding height. And if you also have additional thoughts on that, you can shoot us an email at the email address. It says residential design guidelines says discouraged, not prohibited. What direction do you want to take on this? That goes back to Lisa's point of the difference between the guidelines and standards. And at the beginning, this is just a nuance, but I want to make sure it's very clear. We currently have residential design guidelines. This update is creating objective residential design standards. So we're going from that guidelines of the shoulds or mays or discouraged or highly encouraged to the shalls and musts. So it's going to be incredibly clear for an applicant to know what the expectation is. So just, that's the direction and it's not that we want to take, we are going to take. And that's comes from that requirement, both, for our sake, because, us going back and forth interpreting isn't fun either. It's also a point of the state's requiring those objective standards. Somebody asked a question, what do you mean eyes on the street? Mm-hmm. Really great question. And thank you for asking that and being brave to ask that. So eyes on the street is really, it's a concept about from the inside of your home, being able to have kind of some visual, being able to visually see like what's going on in the street. So if the entrance to a house is set completely back, and it's just a garage that's really occupying so much of the front yard, it's a little bit harder to see what might be going on the street. So it's more of a safety concept for a neighborhood. If you look at this one, here you have, in the top, you've got that big front window, you've got the deck upstairs, you've got the front door. It's really in line with the driveway and then the garage. And, that's giving you some of that eyes on the street from different parts of the inside of your home. You may have a little bit of that here on the one on the bottom as well. Are the FAR ratios changing? I think that any basic FAR ratios that are in the zoning code, we're not looking to change those. I think where there may be any revisions, and it's certainly something that the Planning Commission expressed some interest in, would be on what would trigger a bonus FAR. So those are the things that we're going to be evaluating. We want to make sure that those are the objective, the measurable results. So to that point that Lisa mentioned about for plantings, you want to make sure that they're adding up their point system to get what they need to in order to get whatever bonus or whatever to meet whatever standard is there. And what does FAR mean? Excellent. Another great question. That's the floor area ratio. And Sean, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure. So that's just simply a ratio between the size of the lot and the amount of square footage of structure. So,
yeah. So if you had a 10,000 square foot lot,
right,
you're allowed a
0.65.
Yeah, 0.65. You could do up to 6,500.
6,500 square foot of structure, including the garage.
Yeah.
Garages are counted towards your FAR.
And we don't have, just to be clear, we don't have very many 10,000 square foot lots. I use that because it's an easier number, but if you have that, so imagine a 5,000 square foot lot, and that gives you that, that point.
3,250.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent questions, everyone. And I appreciate the comments, the feedback. Again, we're going to save the chat so we make sure that we have that, have that information for our purposes going forward, because there are some comments in there.
And essentially tonight would educate everybody on what residential design guidelines are. And then from, now you have that context to take the survey and provide feedback to us to start crafting the guideline, or excuse me, the development of the objective development standards or standards.
Right. Sorry, we have the terminology.
Yeah.
It's hard for us to even change and recognize the residential design standards.
So this is just the start of the feedback process that we're hoping to hear from a lot of you tonight. We've got the chats to start, and then the email address, and then the survey. We'll be putting a lot of, Brandy had constructed a one-page document that kind of gives a little bit more of context and detail to read before you take the survey. So,
right. And many of you, if you sat through the presentation, you have that information. But what we wanted to do is we're going to make available this document, the presentation slides. We're going to make available the survey, the video. When this video is available, we'll make sure the video link is there, and then that one pager. If somebody is like, I really don't want to watch an hour of video, the information, they can use that one pager. Now they're not, just so you know, they're not going to have as much information as you have. But it does help people get that kickstart into knowing what they're addressing in the survey. We have another great question. Do FAR or floor area ratio calculations impact ADUs, accessory dwelling units? And just to be clear, per the state requirements, you can't count that accessory dwelling unit square footage towards your FAR. So it is an addition. That's a state requirement of how you calculate that. And has the loss of square footage been in consideration of the new design guidelines? Well, we aren't sure if there's going to be the loss of square footage. That is something that, as we build this, and Lisa had that in the presentation, is we're going to go through making sure that this is, these standards are going to be implementable. And I want to think we do have one person who's already taken the survey, said it's a very good take. That's great. Would you please include the current residential design guidelines on the website? Yeah, we'll have that all in that one page. That's a really great point. I know that we provide the link here. We have it generally on our website, but we'll make sure it's easier to access with everything else.
Yeah, they're on there now too on our current website.
Mm-hmm. But what we're going to do, Sean, was we're going to do one news item that has all of those things I mentioned previously. As well, we'll add the current residential design guidelines.
Great.
Yeah, somebody wanted to clarify the response I gave about the accessory dwelling units. Yes, that square footage is additional to the FAR number. That's a state requirement. Unfortunately, we couldn't regulate otherwise locally. How many members of the public are listening? Well, we had up to 50 members or attendees actually on the meeting tonight. I'm not sure how many are listening. We do have it on YouTube. Again, this will be available for replay. And we'll have that link as a part of that news item. So I want to thank everybody. I don't know if Lisa, Michael, Sean, if you have anything additional you wanted to add.
I want to thank people in advance for taking the survey. I believe there are about 24 questions for those who haven't taken it yet. And it's going to be a very important tool for the team to reference in terms of how the draft standards get crafted, at least the draft set when you see them later this year. We are really hoping, we try to take the time to really craft the survey questions to give us some very specific feedback about things, but also allow some open-ended comments. So just want to thank everybody in advance for taking the time to complete as much of the survey as you can. That was it, Brandy. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. On that note, I want to thank everybody again for those who attended, those who might be rewatching. We appreciate your interest in this topic. I know it may not be as exciting as, maybe a new park or waterfront, but it's just as important, if not more. I mean, as a community development director, I'd like to say it's more, but they're all important. So with that, thank you all. And we'll go ahead and end the meeting. I appreciate everybody's feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.